Hi, welcome to Gamers Chess Club online chess lessons. My name is Jason and this is the 6th lesson in the Introduction to Chess series. Gamers Chess Club is a recreational chess club out of Conroe, Texas, focused on introducing chess to families in a fun and friendly environment. For more information, you can email us at gamerschesskclub@gmail.com or visit the Facebook page at www.facebook.com/gamerschessclub. Today's learning objective involves learning the other special move that we talked about in lesson 2. That's lesson IC02. We said that there were two special moves. We learned in the prior lesson how to castle, and now we're going to learn how to en passant. Okay, en passant is a French phrase that means in passing. And we remember that a pawn can move 2 spaces on its first move. Like we see here, this black pawn could move 2 spaces if it wants to, or the white pawn here on c2 could move 2 spaces up here to c4. When this happens, where it ends up immediately next to an enemy pawn, the enemy pawn has the option on the very next move to capture that piece in passing. It gives the opponent the opportunity to capture the pawn since he moved 2 spaces to pass through danger. So white was trying to avoid danger here by jumping ahead 2 spaces, but black has already marched all the way down here. So in chess, as long as he does it on the immediately following this move, it gives black the opportunity to capture him, and the theory is that he captures him while he's passing through danger. So the black piece lands here on c3. The white piece that was on c4 gets taken off the board. Okay, so I'm going to walk through a scenario here just to illustrate it. This is not a normal opening. This particular opening would probably never happen in a game, but let's just say white moves first to g4. Black follows up by moving to b5. White makes another pawn move to g5. Black goes to b4. And let's say white decides here he wants to move up this pawn from c2 all the way to c4. This is this scenario where black can capture en passant. So black has the option here to capture because the white pawn is immediately next to the black pawn, and it's been his first move, and he took 2 pawn moves. 2 squares. So black can capture en passant. We know that the pawn's captured diagonally, but that's not where the white pawn is. But that's what's unique about this rule. So watch what happens when I move the pawn here. It captured this pawn, and the idea was that it captured it while white was passing through. Because it captured it immediately on the next move, it captures en passant. It's the only move in chess where the piece lands on a different square than the piece it captured. Okay, so let's say white or black did not do that. So let's say instead black made this move here, move the pawn from f7 to f5, and white decides to capture en passant. See, the black pawn is right next to white, so white can capture diagonally, removes the pawn from the board, lands on the f6 square, and let's say black said, you know what, I like that move, I want to do that. And now he's not allowed to do that because it's not immediately following the move from white. So that's how to capture en passant. And again, the key is that immediately after this pawn moves up 2 spaces, the pawn next to it has the option to capture en passant. Okay, so a couple of rules for the en passant move is that the player who wishes to capture en passant or in passing must make this capture on the very next move, like we talked about. So if he or she moves another piece first, he or she loses the opportunity to capture en passant. If you plan to capture in this way, you can't wait. The other rule is that this is the only move in chess where a piece lands on a different square than the captured piece. This is because the idea is that the piece was captured while trying to sneak past the other. So now let's try to practice the en passant maneuver. So here's a question, and I want you to pause it, try to figure out the answer before I give you the answer. So if black's last move was to move his pawn from c7 to c5, can white capture en passant? If so, where will the white pawn land? So in this scenario, this black pawn, the green arrow shows that he just moved from c7 to c5. Can this white pawn capture en passant? Okay, the answer is that yes, he can capture en passant because he is next to it. It's immediately on the next move. The unique thing is that instead of landing here where he's capturing the pawn, he lands on the square c6. Okay, so after this move is over, the white pawn will be on c6, the black pawn will be off the board. Okay, here's another scenario. Please pause it again. Try to figure out the answer before I give it to you. If white moves, if it's white's turn, and white moves from e3 to e4, so from here to here, will the black pawn on f4 be able to capture en passant? So again, the white pawn will end up just next to the black pawn, just like we saw in the last scenario where the pawns were side by side, but there's something different about this scenario. So think about it and decide your answer. Okay, the answer is no, and remember that this only applies, you can only use the en passant move if it's when the pawn has made a move of 2 squares. So in other words, the pawn starting on its home square goes 2 spaces, then he could en passant. But in this scenario, the pawn starts on e3 instead of on e2, so the en passant maneuver is not available. Okay, here's another scenario. Again, don't forget to pause your video here. If white's last move was e2 to e4, so clue here, this is white's, e2 is white's home square for this pawn, and he goes from e2, moves 2 spaces, another clue, all the way to e4. So what are black's options for capturing en passant? Number one, I guess, can black capture en passant, and if so, how? Okay, the answer is that black has 2 choices. Black can either capture en passant with his d pawn, the pawn on d4, or he can capture en passant with the pawn on f4. In both scenarios, the pawn that he uses to capture will end up on the square e3, and the white pawn on e4 will be removed from the board. And here's another scenario. If white's last move was e2 to e4, can black capture en passant? So again, home square goes 2 spaces. Those 2 things sound okay, but look at the board, see what's different about it. See if he's able to capture en passant here. Pause your video now. Okay, the answer is that no, he can't capture en passant. He can capture the pawn in the traditional way by going diagonal, but he can't capture en passant where he lands on a different square and does that fancy maneuver. So this case, yes, he still can capture the pawn, but not like we talked about before. Okay, thanks again for joining us. This was the second of the 2 special moves that we said we would learn. I hope you enjoyed learning to en passant. See you in the future lessons.